Welcome to the IISS this afternoon. My name is Rahul Roy Chaudhary. I'm the Senior Fellow for South Asia at the Institute. A principal element of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign and security policy has been his focus on India's neighborhood. In the last 1 year plus a few days, Prime Minister Modi has visited virtually all of India's immediate neighbors, land as well as maritime. Indeed, his first foreign visit was to Bhutan, and his visits to Nepal and Sri Lanka were, shockingly, the first bilateral visits of an Indian Prime Minister in decades. The only exceptions in terms of visits so far are the Maldives, with a scheduled visit in March being suddenly cancelled, and Pakistan. But India's neighborhood relations have traditionally been fraught with challenges and uncertainties. Yet at the same time, they present tremendous opportunities, as we could see from Modi's visit to Bangladesh earlier this week. The reason for this is the complexity of India's domestic political and security environment, which drives some of these relationships. These are not well understood, nor sometimes suitably recognized. Therefore, to shed some light on the domestic pressures driving India's foreign policy, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Mr. K.C. Verma is one of two Indian officials who have held leadership positions in both India's powerful domestic intelligence agency, the Intelligence Bureau, as well as India's influential external intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing of the Cabinet Secretariat, which he led as his chief for 2 years in 2009 and 2010. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. The sun, I believe, is just coming out. It's a privilege for me to be here, and I thank the IISS for inviting me for this interaction. At the outset, let me state a few disclaimers. I have no pretensions of being a strategic analyst, number one. Number two, my remarks may please be accepted as those of a reasonably well-informed Indian and maybe as a student of contemporary affairs, of contemporary history. Nothing more than that. Am I audible there at the back?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. I just hope you have no problems with my accent. You know, a few years back I had gone to the US and stayed with a friend of mine who'd studied with me in India, and his son was about 6 years old, asks me, and he says in this twang, "Uncle G, why do you speak funny? Just the way Daddy does." So I'm going to speak funny. I hope you'll be able to understand what I'm saying. Let me say that I was born after India got independence. I share that with Mr. Modi. He is the first Indian Prime Minister who's been born after India gained independence. Please come. I have seen all the general elections that have taken place. Of course, I was much too young to vote in the first few. I have a clear recollection of what we did in 1962. We were digging trenches when India had its war with China, 1965 with Pakistan, 1971 with Pakistan. And then, of course, I was part of the official machinery during the infamous emergency. By virtue of my appointments in the government of India over the past 40 years, I can claim to have had the privilege of having a ringside seat of public affairs, so to say, which is my claim to fame. And so what I give to you is my personal opinion, my interpretation of the events as I have seen them. Some of these things are pretty obvious. Some of them may not be so obvious, and I dare say some of them might even be wrong. But generally, I hope my remarks over the next 30 minutes or so shall lead to a better understanding of why some of the policies that the government of India pursues defies common sense. It shall also hopefully give all of you some empathy for the Indian leaders who, and I'm sure none of them are here, with some of the Indian leaders who seem hell-bent on committing harakiri. First, let me say that policy formulation in India, as in any other country, is dependent, it's influenced by a very large number of factors. And it's very seldom that there is one single overwhelming consideration. There are normally a whole lot of strands, minor strings, something like Gulliver being tied down by a whole lot of strings which don't really individually have that much strength as to tie you down or impose what's been called policy paralysis. And the imperatives and determinants of India's policy making are necessarily dependent on what India is, as any other country. But once we consider the location, geography, neighbors, the spread of the country, the population, ethnic groups, linguistic, regional diversities, history, culture, traditions, and increasingly now the economy, we really have to take into account a very large number of factors. Just look at the size of India. Population of 1.25 billion. From east to west, 1,800 miles. From north to south, it's 2,000 miles. We have a land border which is 9,500 miles and a coastline that is 4,700 miles. For comparison, I might mention that from here, London to New York is just about 3,500 miles. We are talking about a coastline that is 4,700 miles. India also shares its history and culture with its neighbors. Immediate neighbors, there's also some which are further away. And it is to be expected that the foreign policy shall be determined by a whole lot of issues. Once you are living with people next door, you do have something to discuss by way of sharing of river waters, boundary disputes, territorial waters, fishing, poaching, smuggling, drug trafficking, and whatnot. Now, when we look at the domestic factors, for India, possibly the most significant factor is the nature of Indian polity and the Indian constitution. People might not generally appreciate this, but India has probably one of the world's most detailed written constitutions. It has taken from the constitution documents, written and unwritten, from a very large number of other democracies. The Indian constitution envisages a federal polity, where the states and the central government are expected to work in tandem and harmony, which is very good in theory. In practice, it doesn't work out. Especially, am I still audible there at the back?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But, it doesn't work out. The state and the center have to be of the same political hue. Very often, it is on account of political considerations that the center and the state do not get along, even when there's really no dispute as regards the substance. The Constitution very clearly lays down, there are in fact three lists in the Constitution, one which is called the Union list, another which is called the State list, and the third which is called the Concurrent list, subjects on which the state and the center can legislate. The states are hypersensitive and they are very, very protective about the states list. Any encroachment or even a perceived encroachment by the central government is very stoutly resisted. This creates problems, especially when we come to security policies, because the issue of policing and the issue of maintenance of public order, these two subjects fall in the state list. And we do have situations where common sense dictates that something should be done in a particular manner, but the states does not agree, and we do have problems when it comes to legislation, including dealing with Maoists or interstate criminals or even counter-terrorist actions. In fact, counter-terrorism in India sometimes has been hostage to political grandstanding between the state and the central government. Now, in my opinion, as a policeman, and I'm saying this as a policeman, we also have distortions in India's security policies on account of, I would say, law enforcement issues. Now, law enforcement issues normally are dumped in the lap of the police, but we do have very serious problems as regards judicial delays. We have an overweening concern for privacy issues, and I know there will be a large number of people who will frown at that statement of mine. We have a very robust human rights lobby, and we have an extremely shrill media. All of them detract from what I would consider a reasoned policy on domestic security issues. There's also been very little infrastructure investment on security, as opposed to fairly generous kind of allocations in the union budgets over the years for social sector. The security infrastructure has definitely suffered, and bad implementation of good laws has often been sought to be corrected by legislating bad laws, which has absolutely created more problems. Now, electoral compulsions, political compulsions also affect security and foreign policies. Like most democracies, India has a very large number of political parties. Traditionally, the two major parties have been slightly left of center and slightly right of center. And in order to have a working majority in Parliament, they have very often taken assistance or formed unlikely coalitions with political groups of more extreme persuasions on the left as also on the right. And these strange bedfellows have often tried to cobble together a working government, a working majority in Parliament. Unfortunately, ideology does not figure anywhere, though I did say slightly left of center and slightly right of center, but that's just about all. The communist parties, which had, I would say, proper ideological underpinnings, have been rapidly losing ground in India, so much so that they stand marginalized. The old socialist thought has been definitely at a discount. So we have groups which pander to, especially, I would say, vote bank politics. Each and every party is looking not at the whole spectrum of voters, not at the whole country, not at the whole public, but they are looking for pockets of their own influence with which they can get maximum returns to Parliament. India has suffered coalition governments for a very long time, I think from 1984 onwards. It's only now, last year, that Mr. Modi got a majority in Parliament. But because we have a bicameral legislature, having a majority in the lower house is not enough. You need a majority in the upper house as well. But the upper house, the members are elected by the legislatures in the states and local bodies, retiring once every 2 years, 1/3 of them. So if any party gets a majority in the lower house, it does not automatically get a majority in the upper house. And it does create further problems of political adjustment with various parties in order to be able to legislate or push through the legislation that you want to do. As an example, I might mention that all the union governments at different points of time have taken advantage or have taken the support of the dominant parties in Tamil Nadu, the Dravid Monnetra Kazhagam and the All India Dravid Monnetra Kazhagam, AIADMK and DMK. Now, because of their Tamil affinities with Sri Lanka, the DMK or the AIADMK, for extending support on some tertiary issue to the central government, have demanded that India's foreign policy towards Sri Lanka should be fashioned in a certain manner. So sometimes you feel that India's foreign policy towards Sri Lanka is decided by the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu sitting in Chennai, rather than in South Block where the Ministry of External Affairs is located. Pardon me, sir, for saying that. We've got a former Indian Foreign Secretary here, and I beg your pardon for saying it, sir, but that's my opinion. I might also mention India's relations with Bangladesh. Over the last 3 years, they've been more or less hostage to the petulance of the Chief Minister of West Bengal. And this time she agreed, and therefore Mr. Modi has had a highly successful visit to Bangladesh. Now, besides the legislation part of it, the central government often has to strike deals for ensuring its own stability in Parliament. And at the moment we are experiencing this kind of a logjam over several bills which the Modi government wants to push through, but they are unable to do so on account of not having a majority in the upper house. I'm sure there will be compromises that shall be made. Deals shall have to be struck if we want to go ahead with things like the land reform bill or the insurance bill or the labor laws, which definitely need corrections. Then amongst the domestic issues, I also come to the demographic considerations. India has a massive youth bulge. 50% of India's population is below the age of 25. 2/3 of India's population is below the age of 35. It is projected that in 2020, the median age in India shall be 29, whereas in China it shall be 37. Everyone says that this represents a huge workforce. It's a tremendous asset. But it's also a tremendous time bomb ticking away, unless and until we are able to meet the aspirations of these people. And mind you, there are any number of hidden persuaders beaming 24/7 advertisements on 800 TV channels of India. They promise you everything. All that they say is get a job, get a few 100,000 rupees in your pocket, and the world is yours. And I feel, and I'm not, I think, the only person, everyone knows this, that we have probably the greatest challenge in India as to how to manage this youth bulge. Another demographic challenge is the spread of populations across the subcontinent. India has to consider ethnic groups living in contiguous areas of its neighbors while deciding its foreign policy. Whether it is Nepal or Bangladesh or Myanmar, not so much Bhutan, not so much now Pakistan, but definitely with Sri Lanka, we have to be aware of the fact that we have the same population spread out. The Muslim population is again an extremely sensitive issue in Indian policy making and Indian political life. Muslims in India number about 180 million. They form 15 to 16% of India's total population. Exact figures may be a bit here and there. It is the second largest Muslim population in the world after Indonesia, which has 205 million people. India also has the largest Shia population in the world after Iran. Now, when we have such a huge population of Muslims, naturally, domestic policies will have to be formulated keeping in mind this significant proportion of the Muslim electorate. The Constitution declares India to be a secular country, but by and large, the political parties have seen India's secular nature to be, or they have interpreted it to mean a favorable position for India's religious minorities. Because of this, sometimes the civil laws, sometimes even anti-terror laws have to reckon with Muslim sensibilities. There have been occasions in the past when the government has been more sensitive or more aware of Muslim issues than even the Muslim ulemas were. The Muslim leaders, the religious leaders, didn't want certain concessions which the government of India insisted on giving to the Muslims. It is not so much religion as vote bank politics. Now, another factor of this is India's engagement with what I would call the Islamic countries or the Middle East or the Arab world, because India has deep social, cultural, historical linkages, civilizational linkages with all the countries. Now, with Saudi Arabia, the relations are special because of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Makkah and Medina. India's Hajj quota is 136,000. Besides this 136,000, another 200,000 to 300,000 Indians go on Umrah. Umrah being the pilgrimage undertaken outside the Hajj month. Besides Saudi Arabia, then Iran has the special place because of the number of Shias, and in this minefield of Shia-Sunni relations, India has to balance its relations with Israel. Probably for this reason, no Indian Prime Minister had ever visited Israel earlier. Now Mr. Modi intends to do so. India is dependent on a large number of these countries for its oil. 80% of India's oil comes from outside. Foreign remittances are important. India's population abroad is something in the region of 30 million. 30 million expatriate Indians send home something like 70 billion US dollars. That's 4% of the GDP. There are expatriate Indians all over the place. They are vying for top positions in various boardrooms. They are IT professionals. I believe some of them make steel here. But the sum and substance, the lump sum of the India's foreign remittances comes from the what I would call the Arab countries, basically. Out of the 70 billion US dollars, 30 billion US dollars comes from the GCC countries alone, because there the whole economy runs because of the labor provided by Indians, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis. Now, for this reason, India has to be concerned about what's happening there. But it's not just a matter of money. India has to be sensitive to the fact that its citizens are working there. Their safety is important. It's little appreciated, but in this very turbulent area of the world, India has had to pull out its citizens at different points of time. More than 170,000 Indians were brought out from Kuwait in 1990s.
91.
You were there, sir? No. Okay. This is the time when Saddam invaded Kuwait. 170,000 Indians were brought out in 488 special flights of Air India, carried out in a span of 59 days. It's said to be the single largest evacuation of any number of people by air. And recently we've had evacuations done at a large number of other places, including, Libya, Lebanon, most recently in Yemen. From Yemen, as recently as April of this year, India brought home 5,000 citizens, and I think in addition there were something like 2,000 citizens of 40 other countries which were also brought out. Now, all of these evacuation is done not as a straight question of transporting aid from point B to C. It's the result of some degree of diplomacy somewhere. Now, the question is, can Modi overcome these compulsions? Because all that I've stated till now are basically in some way or the other absolutes. So can Modi change anything? Has anything changed? What has Modi government achieved or tried to achieve? Now let me remind you, as Rahul said, Modi government finished 1 year in office last month. In fact, as recently as last week, the celebrations were still on. The detractors of Modi keep saying that there's nothing but sentiment and shorn of, there's no real achievements, it's only just sentiment and nothing more. There are others who totally disagree with that, and stock taking leads to both, the domestic and the foreign policy part. Now, it was expected that Modi would concentrate on the domestic agenda. After all, he came with that Vikas meaning progress or development for all. And he should have remained mired in domestic issues. Instead, he has shown tremendous energy and focus on external issues. He has brought a robust approach to foreign affairs, which has not been seen for decades. In substance, really, there is continuity. There has not been any radical break from the past. But in style, there has been a terrible, terrible is the wrong word, a total change. And everyone says that this is due to Mr. Modi's personal effort and energy. In his first year in office, he has visited 18 countries. Some of these countries had not witnessed a bilateral visit by the Indian Prime Minister in years and years. As you mentioned, let me mention Nepal, 17 years. Sri Lanka, after 28 years. Australia, 28 years. Fiji, 33 years. Seychelles, 34 years. No Indian Prime Minister had ever been to Mongolia earlier. And mind you, Mongolia considers India to be part of their extended neighborhood, and they have special links on account of Buddhism. And now, as I said, Mr. Modi will be the first Prime Minister to visit Israel. Mr. Modi has, to a large extent, I would say, broken from India's traditional preoccupation with Pakistan. He's been quite attentive to nurturing relations with the other immediate neighbors. He's been able to convey very clearly that the countries of South Asian region have the strength and unity, and that India is willing to invest collectively in that. He has repeatedly, said this. He has repeated his priorities. He kept on saying neighborhood first, and earlier it was considered a bit of an innovation. The government had taken the foreign policy of look east. Mr. Modi, he's a great one for slogans once in a while, I can say that. He has changed it. He has said not look east, he has said act east. So it's neighborhood first and act east. Now, this part I think I shall read from my notes. This is my route map so that I don't stray too much or take too much time. But this road map also goes into the dustbin when I sort of see that not too many people are asleep. So, before the Bangladesh trip, Mr. Modi had remarked on the settlement issue of the boundary dispute. Mind you, this was before he went. He said to a newspaper, and I quote, he said, "We had settled the long pending land boundary issues with Bangladesh by taking all parties into confidence. The media has not realized this massive achievement and is talking of other issues. Had this been elsewhere in the world, it would have been cited as an example as big as the fall of Berlin Wall. The entire mood of our neighborhood has changed dramatically because of our message of shared prosperity being implemented on the ground." Unquote. He added further, and I'm breaking this up from the other quote, because I don't know whether he meant to emphasize it or not, but I'm emphasizing it. Mr. Modi after that said, and I quote again, "Mine is a practical and outcome-based diplomacy." Unquote. The emphasis is mine. I don't know whether he wanted to add it or not. So, at the end of 1 year, definitely, the balance sheet as regards external affairs is positive. He's done well with the neighbors, middle powers, big powers, but at the same time, there's an awareness about India needing to not have a mismatch between what it can deliver and what it hopes to deliver. And Mr. Modi has, I think it's not been articulated, but I think what he wants to do is that instead of being a kind of a balancing power, he envisages India to be a potentially leading power. Now, all of this is possible if the domestic scene is fine, because the test of foreign policy really comes in your domestic situation. And here, I would like to flag 2 or 3 issues which possibly could be game changers. Otherwise, we are likely to remain bogged down with the same domestic issues. First, I would say that within the BJP, the ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, there has been a generational change. Mr. Modi has finally been able to say bye-bye to the old guard. I think that's final, irrevocable. And by choosing to ignore senior party leaders like Kalyan Singh, L.K. Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, the break signifies by itself a wish to look forward, to change. Now, this has also ushered in a slightly brash style of functioning, and his relatively young ministerial team is copying some of that. Whether that's for the good or bad, I think we'll have to wait and see. And I think this will also have an impact on other political parties where members of the geriatric club, as I call them, will probably not find a place on their board. The second important phenomenon, I think, has been the death of ideology. This is again an absolute statement, but I think that is so. The communist parties being more or less wiped out, the left liberals in India have always been sort of put on a pedestal. It has been assumed that the left liberal thought has intrinsic virtue. That is changing, and I think with this, the old Nehruvian economic policies shall go, and maybe we will move on to newer things. In fact, the Modi government has clearly said that they are pro-business, but being pro-business does not mean that they are anti-poor. The focus is shifting on increasing the size of the cake or the pie rather than keeping on talking about equitable distribution of that pie. Third, and this is not related to the BJP, is the rise of the Aadmi party. As you might be aware, this new party came into being and swept the polls in the elections of Delhi state. This represents, in my view, a phenomenon of the urban Indian elite coming into its own. This has always been the silent majority, always been taken for granted, always in the political parties' calculations, the kind of people who will not get out of the comfort of their homes to come and vote, and therefore could be disregarded. The Delhi electorate has tried to prove that this is not so. And hopefully, because in my view it's a very healthy sign, in my view this may take a little longer to really become a part of the Indian political scene, because the old vote bank, the castes, the small little community here, the small vote manager there, will continue to remain relevant because of the large rural voters. And I think most important, the fourth change which is taking place, it's still in the making. I hope I'm right on this. This relates to the way political issues are perceived in India. Lingering Gandhian influence has led to a firm belief, I would say, in the Indian psyche, or at least in the Indian political body, in the Indian political mass, that all political problems, no matter what they are, they have moral solutions. Now, there is a realization that political problems don't necessarily have moral solutions. We've seen this in the way there's been hard-nosed bargaining by the BJP to get a majority for the government on get passage of some bills. There's been hard-nosed bargaining in Parliament. Some of the recalcitrant chief ministers have been bribed into going along with the union government on the union government policies. In fact, somebody remarked on this that the bilateral meeting between Mr. Modi and Hasina in Bangladesh, Mamata Banerjee, the chief minister of West Bengal, was put on the same platform as an equal, which many people found somewhat incongruent. But I consider it a way of managing a mercurial chief minister who had till now been stonewalling just about every move that the two countries wanted to take forward. Now, in this changed environment, Mr. Modi has some breathing time, because for the time being the opposition parties are in disarray. The Congress doesn't really know what to do. And I'll end by saying this, that nobody really takes any party's pre-poll promises with any degree of seriousness. It is expected that political parties will make promises. It is expected that the manifestos will promise you the moon. But unfortunately for Mr. Modi, there are tremendous expectations from him. Nobody compares him with the regime that went earlier. Everyone compares him with what they think he wants to deliver, what he is capable of delivering, what he has promised to deliver. And therein lies the greatest challenge, I think, for Mr. Modi. It's a difficult task, a very difficult task. With that, I end my opening remarks. I thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to once again thank you for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all.
Thank you very much, sir. We have about 25 minutes left in the session for questions and answers, the discussion session. Let me start by saying that, well, I think you provided a very comprehensive perspective of the domestic pressures towards India's foreign policy and security decision making. You've also talked about, I think, the key sort of relationships that the DMK have had in terms of Sri Lanka, India's relationship with Sri Lanka, in a negative sense, where because of the political party in Tamil Nadu, the then Indian Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was not able to attend the Commonwealth Heads of Summit meeting in Sri Lanka, as a result of which the plan initially was that he would be the first foreign Prime Minister to visit Jaffna, but as it happened, the British Prime Minister David Cameron became the first foreign British foreign Prime Minister to visit Jaffna.
Conceded.
So there's a negative aspect. You've talked about Bangladesh, where again the mercurial nature of Mamata Banerjee, who's actually, I think, visiting the UK in the next few weeks, has impacted negatively in terms of India's relationship with Bangladesh. But let me just turn this around and say, well, what is the potential for such provinces, neighboring and with links to other countries in different ways? What is the potential for them to have a positive influence, a positive role in India's foreign policy towards the neighborhood? And in addition to the potential, sort of what is required for this to take place? Thank you.
Okay. It's an odd way of bowling me a googly, but let me put it this way, that by an unstated kind of convention, in India, the foreign policy has remained constant, irrespective of the political view of the central government. The foreign policy was a constant. There was never any debate on it. It was a given. And in the policy formulation, I go back to the state list and the union list. The state list doesn't figure foreign relations anywhere. They have no say. In fact, there are a large number of issues where one nation interacts with another nation. In none of them does the state have a say. So the question of contributing positively or negatively just does not arise. The reason why it has become remarkable is because of this negative influence, which has been wielded for the very first time, not very first time, but I think in a very significant fashion in recent years, by AIDMK, DMK, Mamata Banerjee. In the past, there have been instances where a chief minister of a certain state has wanted something. I mean, for example, the chief minister of Bihar had a very significant stake in what was happening with the Kosi project or what was happening with the Gandak project, river waters. But that did not really impact on what I would call foreign policy. Individual issues, they would project their requirement to the Ministry of External Affairs, and the Ministry of External Affairs looked after it. It is because it has moved from the pale of the MEA for the first time that this matter has assumed some significance. Otherwise, no one would even comment on it. And mind you, I mean, you don't go around changing your foreign policies with the frequency with which you change the color of your central government, or at least the way we do. So,
Thank you. Let me, yes, Colonel Zulfikar Ali Bhatti, the Army advisor for the Pakistan High Commission, Army and Air.
Thank you very much for a very informative session. Just had a couple of points, maybe slight disagreements, and I'd like to see your comment. The first thing was regarding, you made the statement that the BJP was apparently slightly right of center. And there'll probably be many people in the world who would say that it's quite a lot right of center rather than just slightly. So your comment on that, especially in view of the fact that there's probably no Muslim MP from BJP who's been elected to parliament, even though there's a population of Muslims, the second largest Muslim population, and not even a single serving Muslim MP with BJP. And how does it affect has it affected the secular image of India as well? Your second point regarding you said that Modi had ended the sort of the obsession or the preoccupation with Pakistan. In recent sort of months and weeks, I think we see a flurry of statements, one coming from the Defense Minister of India that we will counter terrorism with terrorism. Second coming from your Foreign Office that the economic corridor between Pakistan and China was unacceptable to India. And just yesterday, I think one of the junior ministers saying that we could literally attack any part of Pakistan, quoting Bhutan. And linked with this is also that great magnanimity has been shown by Prime Minister Modi when dealing with land disputes with Bangladesh. But in similar land disputes with Pakistan, I think Indian stance is very harsh, I would say, very non-flexible, where, for example, the Kashmir dispute is not even accepted as a dispute, and that's why there's no debate in that. So your comments.
Okay, you've raised 4 points, and I'll try and answer them. And I'll start in the reverse direction. Kashmir issue, for the time being, let's keep it away. Otherwise, we'll probably get mired in Kashmir issue only.
Not as a Kashmir, just as a land dispute.
No, second, you mentioned that India has shown great magnanimity towards Bangladesh. I don't think so. It's not magnanimous. There's definitely no question of either country having compromised any interest. Yes, I mean, if you measure in terms of how many square kilometers of land Bangladesh gains and how many square kilometers of land India gains, Bangladesh gains more, but that was an established fact. Those enclaves were, in any case, right there. The poor people who were there in the enclaves were suffering. I might mention for the information of all the people who might not be aware, when it's said that when people drew up the India-Bangladesh border, both parties were probably very high on cannabis. And that's why they drew this very funny line. So, in fact, the border between India and Bangladesh, which has been settled now, is one line which is wavering all over the place like that. And there are islands of territory on both sides of the border. In fact, something like 162 of them. 100 bits of Bangladesh, or it's the other way around, I think 50 bits of Bangladesh are in Indian territory and 100 bits of India are in Bangladesh. It defies common sense, unless cannabis is common sense. But actually it is historical. It said long back the Raja of Kuch Bihar, it was very fond of playing chess, and the Nawab of Rampur, or no, not Rampur, another, the Nawab on the other side. And each time when they lost or won a game of chess, they said so many villages are yours and so many villages are yours. As a consequence, these enclaves are there on both sides. And for the last 60 odd years, the people living in these islands of territory don't have access to roads, they don't have access to electricity, they can't even go and get a passport. Now what Mr. Modi has done, and what in both governments, mind you, it's not Mr. Modi who has done, I'm saying that because he's my Prime Minister. What both governments had been trying to do for years was to settle this. There's no magnanimity. Magnanimity has a giver and taker part of it. It's not that. Now, whether it can be extended to Kashmir, whether it can be extended with Pakistan, why not? I think it's for the policy makers to take a call on that. On the preoccupation with Pakistan and the statement which you made, let me say that it is balanced. The government of India has, I would say in the past 1 year, broken out. They are in dialogue with many other countries. I mean, I'd say in the case of India, foreign policy or foreign policy imperatives as perceived, not in reality, as perceived as what being discussed, 40-50% of the time was taken up with Pakistan. And I think Pakistan's 80 or 90% of the time is taken up with India. But Mr. Modi has definitely said, fine, our relations with Pakistan are important. But so are our relations with Malaysia or Thailand or Vietnam or wherever. The first question which you asked about BJP not having a single Muslim MP, I think they do. But they had given a few tickets. But to notionally give a few tickets, I think doesn't really matter. Being right or left is not a matter of religion. Being right or left is, and the way I perceive it, is a matter of economic policies. And when I talk about the Congress being slightly left of center, I mean that they veered around more to the socialist school. And when I'm talking about the BJP being slightly right and not far right, being slightly right, I'm talking about their economic policies. Both parties are important. In fact, I keep on saying, why shouldn't the two of them join together in a centrist coalition and we'll have a very stable government? Sunte nahi hai.
Vinod Kumar.
Thank you. I would like to pull together several different strands of your talk. One, you mentioned the young people, the time bomb. 25% of, 50% of the young people are under 25. You also mentioned the rise of AAP as representing the urban elite's frustration with the political system as operated over the last 10, 15 years. And now you're saying also the tremendous expectations from Modi. Now, Modi has adopted a policy of, as you said, pro-business but not anti-poor. Well, with that stance, will he be able to actually satisfy the expectations and stop the time bomb from, actually exploding? And if not, what will be its implications both for the domestic politics and the foreign policy? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I do not pretend to be an economist, but I would put it this way, that no economist can really predict that. Recently, we were discussing this as the matter of Make in India. Now, what exactly is Make in India? Make in India requires electricity. India, nowhere in the foreseeable future, has that kind of electricity available for setting up that much of an industrial base. It's simply not possible. Water, we have a serious issue there. In terms of the generation of employment opportunities, we will not be able to keep pace with the kind of population that we have. But there are baby steps that have been taken. A whole lot of emphasis being given to the manufacturing sector. The skilling of people has been taken up on a very large basis. We have, over the last few months, seen a very focused, very, I would say, powerful drive to try and get foreign direct investment. We've been hearing a lot about clearing the cobwebs, making it an investor-friendly regime, making it easier to set up industries. Let me put it this way, sir, I'm praying very hard.
Ambassador Bill Milam, former ambassador of the US to Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Thank
No, you sit down. I'll be able to see you.
That's okay. I'd like to stand up.
He wouldn't let me.
You said a couple of things that motivated this question. In fact, two questions, Rahul. I hope you'll allow me. One pertains to the western border and one pertains to the eastern border. In the west, we have Pakistan and to the north, Afghanistan, which you didn't mention at all, and Pakistan you mentioned only briefly. But there's things going on there that are driven by the internal dynamics of both countries. And my analyst friends who follow terrorists and terrorist groups tell me that the kaleidoscope that we've known of different terrorist groups in both countries is breaking up and reforming. And that in Afghanistan it is going to be more or less those Taliban and those terrorists who want to negotiate with the government and those who don't. And those who don't will drift towards what? ISIS, which is growing in Afghanistan. And the same thing is true in Pakistan. There's a growing ISIS problem there because the groups there are breaking up, and those that disagree with the Pakistan Taliban are drifting towards ISIS. And the question there, and you mentioned, sir, that a great proportion of your Islamic population is Shia. So how does this drift towards ISIS, which is a Shia killing organization, a sectarian organization? How does that affect Indian policy towards Pakistan and Afghanistan? Would there be any kind of motivation to try and work a little harder to bring Pakistan and India together not together in, I didn't mean together in the marriage kind of way, but I meant together in terms of working their problems out and perhaps being a little bit more, shall we say, less hostile to each other? That's the first question. On the Bangladesh side, you've mentioned the Chief Minister of West Bengal as sort of holding India's policy towards Bangladesh hostage. Now, I don't think the big issue there between India and Bangladesh was the land, even though they worked it out very nicely, and I'm very happy they did. And I think they need to work out the Teesta problem, but I don't think that's the big problem. The big problem seems to me to be that India, both under the Congress and now under the Modi government, has been very enabling of the drift towards real serious authoritarian government in Bangladesh. And if you drift towards authoritarian government, you're going to actually drive the extremists who are there deeper undercover and people who are on the edge of extremism into extremism. In other words, the Modi government, Congress before it, seems to be doing exactly the opposite of what it wants to do in Bangladesh, which is to stabilize the country and get rid of the links to extremism. So those are my questions. They're not really questions.
Thank you. Good comment. I'll put it this way, that you have, in a way, answered your own questions, but I'd like to add to that comment, if I might. First, I don't think I understand the ISIS as basically Shia. This thing. I would like to interpret it more in terms of its religious content. And for India, the important thing to understand is that whenever anyone is talking about establishment of the Khilafat, it has a link to India's freedom struggle. When the Caliphate was abolished, Mahatma Gandhi gave support to the re-establishment of the Caliphate. For good reason or bad, I don't want to go into all that, but the fact of the matter remains that the Caliphate remains something emotional, something very nice attached to, linked to India's freedom struggle. That's one part. Second thing is that the developments in Pakistan, Afghanistan, what's happening on the border, the American drawdown, the way in which India has been trying to interact, India's help to Afghanistan for its developmental project, Afghanistan's seeking assistance from India off and on, Pakistan, and my friend there would probably agree, Pakistan putting down its foot and saying Afghanistan shall not have any military training of its officers in India, and India's mainly civil assistance to Afghanistan. These are issues which may or may not have any definite impact on the overall terrorism content. But what is likely to definitely have an impact on the terrorism content is the fact that, the ISIS has very clearly said, if I were to put it very crudely, the Taliban sort of said a dawa. It was an invitation to terror, or it was an invitation to establish the caliphate. Whereas what the ISIS has said, that it is your right and it is your duty to establish the caliphate. And therefore, in place of X, Y, and Z going and joining up with an organization at ABC location, what the ISIS has done is basically said that it is your duty to wage a jihad. And therefore, we are bound to see what I call retail terrorism. It may not be linked specifically either to a territory, it may not be, you may not be able to trace it back to Afghanistan, you may not be able to take it back to Syria, but yes, the cyber world, yes, the internet, a large number of self-professed jihadis will be waging what I call retail terror. And we are bound to see an increase of this irrespective of what happens in Afghanistan. Therefore, for me, the re-establishment of the caliphate is a far more momentous development for a world which is exposed, a whole lot of soft targets are exposed, rather than the drawdown in Afghanistan, which of course is, a very significant development, important development, and we can only keep our fingers crossed there.
I've got 5 people on my list, so let me take the first 2 sets of interventions for Antoine Levesque, Research Associate, IISS.
Thank you. Can I ask you a quick question about the National Counterterrorism Centre, which the UPA had a stab at, and it wasn't possible to get it through. So, do you think the Modi government might have a better chance of attempting it?
I'll put it this way.
We'll take
Okay, we'll
Adil Sultan, Visiting Fellow for South Asia, IISS.
Thank you. I don't meant to be a Pakistan-India dialogue, so I'll not repeat what my colleagues said about those statements, but just building on. Let me thank you very much for bringing clarity in this retail terrorism, this very fascinating term, because it's very important to understand. We get so much disillusioned by this with these ISIS because we don't understand the genesis and we start explaining the problem. But thank you very much for this very interesting terminology that you coined. My comment that refers to what my colleague said. It was for the very first time. You have been a raw chief, and you know it very much more than what we all know. No state functionary has ever publicly admitted that they can indulge in terrorism. So this was the first time that Indian Minister of Defense, he made that statement. So this was very significant. And then the National Security Advisor last year also in February, he also kind of threatened, but before becoming a National Security Advisor, but he was a former IB chief also. These kind of signalings coming from India, it reduces the space both in India and Pakistan, because then media starts to play and the political leadership, their space for engagement with each other, that reduces. So irrespective of what Prime Minister Modi is doing with or dealing with other neighborhoods, the fact remains, unless it Prime Minister Modi deals with Pakistan proactively, the South Asian neighborhood will never be settled. So he can never just disregard Pakistan and engage with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and all this thing. What is your assessment? When is he likely to, or is there a possibility of Prime Minister Modi after a certain time reaching out to Pakistan, or the existing trends which are ongoing are going to persist, and probably there is going to be confrontation between Pakistan and India?
We're going to answer 3 questions after this. So if you answer these 2 and then we'll
Okay,
go to the last.
fine. First, about the establishment of the National Counter-Terrorism Center. You know, the NCTC kind of has been already functioning. It's been functioning within the Intelligence Bureau. Now there is talk about not the NCTC but about the NatGrid, that is the national grid linking the various data banks, which also, I mean, that was a classic example of this, how the states can affect your security policy making. There were all kinds of concerns about privacy issues, and high-level analytics were not to be introduced. So the NatGrid chief, more or less in disgust, said, look, if I'm not going to do all the analytics, then what are you doing? You're just linking the data banks with a single query. It's not worth it. But whether we establish an NCTC as an entity outside or we have it residing within the Intelligence Bureau doesn't really make a difference. So I fail to get the import of your question on that.
No, I just wanted to.
Okay, fine. Now, coming to that very, very shortly. Number one, I'm not assuming that the Modi government is disregarding Pakistan. I don't think so. There have been 3 or 4 initiatives over the last 1 year, I think from both sides, to get a dialogue going. They've not been able to do so because something or the other happened. To say that Modi is now looking at Bangladesh or settling with other neighbors and spiting Pakistan, I'm afraid that that's not essentially either what he's doing or what I wanted to say. What I did mean was that he's definitely engaging far more with all the countries and getting out of that mindset that Pakistan is the be-all and end-all of India's foreign policy. It's not. It never was. But the general perception being that we are mired in that and we'll keep on discussing that without making any progress, I think it's high time we broke out of it. Or rather, we were never really so much in it. It's much more, from the way I look at it, Pakistan's problem, that it is a one-point foreign policy. If India says day, you've got to say night. I'm afraid that's the way I look at it. I could be wrong. Right. But coming on the confrontation or these statements which have been made, what the defense minister said was that it takes a thorn to take out a thorn. Full stop. Now, if that is being interpreted that India will hit back with the same terrorist fashion or something, well, so be it. Because then you are admitting you are the thorn. He never said that we will have a counter strike of terrorists or this, that. He said it takes a thorn to take out a thorn. I would not like to interpret or see so much more into it as the media on both sides has done. About the Myanmar strike. Now, I left India yesterday. This took place after that. From what I have understood from the news channels, is that Indian forces struck 2 or 3 kilometers inside Myanmar at a camp of rebel Nagas who had attacked Indian army and killed 18 Indian army men about 15 days ago. This was done with the approval of the Myanmar government. Now, if you have any idea about the Somra Tract, the area opposite Ukhrul, the area opposite Samtal, it is a no man's land. The writ of the government of Myanmar does not run anywhere above Kalimio or Kaleva. All that area is no man's land. And if the Nagas have their camps there, and mind you, I have had good access to those camps, and those camps have been there for donkey's years. For the first time, the government of India talked to the government of Myanmar and said, fine, we want to hit them. I'm sure they said yes. It can't be a plain, outright act of aggression. if after that, and I did refer to the shrill media, if after that the media asks a question, is this to send a signal to Pakistan, and some stupid analyst says yes, I'm sorry, I don't think our relations can be held so much hostage by an 18-year-old chit of a girl or a boy who's wielding a microphone and saying, how does it feel to attack Pakistan? Or, as I think I mentioned to you earlier, are you going to attack Pakistan by this evening, yes or no? And you can't give any other answer. You've got to say yes or you've got to say no. I'm afraid things are far more nuanced than that. And I would definitely not like to react on the basis of what this news channel or that news channel is saying. We've got 300 news channels in India beaming news 24/7. They have to sell their channels. Breaking news.
Thank you. We've run out of time, but I know that 3 other people who want to ask questions. So I'd ask you to be very brief, make your, ask a question and make a comment, and then we'll listen to the response. Vipul, I'm sorry, yes, Vipul, yes, first. Quickly, Vipul.
Vipul Thakur. I would very brief comment.
Sure.
One, apart from common sense, India had incentive to cooperate with Bangladesh because Bangladesh government took very effective steps against anti-India terrorists. While in case of Pakistan, instead of punishing LET terrorists who attacked Mumbai, nothing has happened, and if anything, meetings are being held by LET in Pakistan with the help of the police. If Pakistan gives up this policy, then they will find positive responsibility.
Thank you. That's a comment. Yes,
I
please.
agree.
Yes, please. Just after this.
Jam Safarov, Embassy of Uzbekistan. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments and insight. It is already announced that Mr. Modi is visiting Central Asia very soon in July, including my country. So my question is whether regions like mine, Central Asia, are considered as within the neighborhood policy of New Delhi, or they are still considered within some sort of outer layer regional policy. And if it is so, if it is a neighborhood policy still, what domestic issues or forces are driving this policy? Obviously, it's not diaspora issues. Religious issues are playing less significant role, so in comparison with other Islamic states. So if it is energy geopolitics, so whether states in India or business lobbies are also influencing it, or we're talking here about the strategic state concerns, like you mentioned that New Delhi is going to play more role of the potential leader in the region rather than the balancing power. So here we have the vis-a-vis China and Russia.
Thank you. The last question, yes, if you could identify yourself, please.
I'm Niranjan Kumar. I'm a student in King's College here. My question is related to corruption, which you briefly touched in your talk. During the election campaign, Mr. Modi had talked about bringing black money and all. How do you see that has translated into actions vis-a-vis foreign policy? Number 2, China policy. It's I don't see much headway in that. What is your take?
Thank you. 2 minutes to
Right.
wrap
1
up.
minute.
1 minute.
China policy, I'm sorry, I just can't comment. It's too vast a topic. Number 2, I did not refer to corruption at all. But on black money, which was promised, etc., we are getting some kind of cooperation. Names have been shared. International treaties have to be acknowledged and honored. About Modi Saab's visit to Uzbekistan and other Central Asian countries, I'll put it this way, that, in India, we do tend to be neighborhood-centric. There's no denying it. At the same time, the reality is that we need our energy. We are overly dependent on imports of oil. 80% of India's energy needs come from outside. And anywhere that we can see for oil or gas, we need friends. We need them very badly. It is not just a question of I made that statement that wanting to be a leader rather than a balancing force. Please accept that as my statement. I don't think that is Mr. Modi's stated policy. It well might be, but I am not privy to his thoughts. Over.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you very much. I think I'd really like to thank you very much, sir, for the stimulating presentation, the discussion, obviously that followed. I think you put in perspective the Prime Minister's priorities, especially from a domestic framework. And I think where you ended your presentation with talking about expectations and the requirement to meet expectations clearly is a key concern. But as you said, this is the first year of a 5-year Modi government, and there is still a lot to be written and said. But one thing I'm fairly clear about is that the term non-alignment is definitely not coming into being in this government, at least. So with that, I'd like to thank you and ask all of you to join me in this.